So this morning, we're going to talk about the community of Jesus. This is some information that I love talking about. It's very, very real to me. I love it very much. So let's get into it. As we all know, there are very many different types of communities, right? Some are more interesting than others. Some are more exciting than others. And then some are just much more, well, we'll just say more than others, okay? I've been in a lot of different type of communities in my life. At one point, I was in a bowling community. At another point, I was in a soccer community. And then at another point, I was even in a softball community. For 8 years, I was in a very different type of community that was called the U.S. Army. That's a community of itself, right? Those of you who have served, thank you for your service. And if you're still serving, thank you for your service. If I had to pick one to go back into, it'd be the bowling one, because it's far less active work than the rest of them, okay? Trust me. 4 steps, throw a ball, walk back to your seat. Done. Perfect activity, right? But today I want to talk about the community of Jesus, okay? The great thing about the community of Jesus was it was made up of things. So they were all made up of groups. The community of Jesus was made up of groups, right? 3 different groups. We're going to talk about those here in a second. All the groups are different. None of them were the same, just like our small groups. All of them are different. None of them are the same, okay? And all the groups serve a purpose: to strengthen, encourage our groups, okay? So for the next few minutes, I want to talk about the community of Jesus and these groups that formed the community of Jesus. And then at the end, we're going to look at a passage that I believe sums up what Jesus taught about the perfect community, okay? So first, we're going to talk about a group I'm going to call the few. This would be the group of Jesus' disciples that follow Jesus, right? I'm not talking about only the 12 disciples. I'm talking about the community of disciples that follow Jesus. The tax collectors, the uneducated, the fishermen. Now, most of you are like, there was more than 12. Some of you might not realize that. But in Luke, who thoroughly investigated the life of Jesus, he wrote this in Luke 10. He said, "The Lord chose 72 other disciples and sent them ahead of in pairs to all the towns and places he planned to visit." Now, there's a lot of questions and things about the number 72. Some other translations say 70. The point that I'm trying to make was there was more than 12. There wasn't only 12. There was at least 82. Right? 12 plus, well, in mine, yes, but 70, somewhere between 74, 84, and 72. But yes, with this translation, it would be 84. That is correct. But at least 82 if you go by the lower number of 70 in the other translations, right? So at least 82 disciples that Jesus sent out to change the world, right? So if the few were the people that really were Jesus' close followers, who do they represent? Who does the few, the disciples, represent in our modern age today? Well, they represent those who have given it all to Jesus, right? Those who have given him their entire life, everything they own, all their possessions, they're all in. They've given it all to Jesus, right? They also represent those that do what Jesus told his disciples to do in both Matthew and Luke. In Luke chapter 10, just after he sent out his disciples, he gave them this instructions: "The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord, who is in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his field. Now go, and remember that I am sending you out as lambs among wolves." In Matthew chapter 10, they wrote this: "Jesus sent out the 12 apostles with these instructions: Do not go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans, but only to the people of Israel, God's lost sheep. Go and announce to them that the kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cure those with leprosy, and cast out demons. Give as freely as you have received." So that's the group of the few. Those that are all in and giving it all to Jesus. The next group that we're going to talk about is the proud. This should be a no-brainer. But if you don't understand what I'm talking about, this is the group of religious leaders in the time of Jesus. They were always around Jesus. This group was made up of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, which reminds me of a joke my wife told me not to tell. So naturally, I'm not going to tell it because I'm a good husband. But I am going to tell you a joke my son told me, which I think was great. So, what do you call Batman when he skips church? Christian Bale. Oh, come on, dad joke of the year right there, right? Come on, that's great, right? Come on, y'all laughing. Stay with me. Okay, let's get serious again. I'm sorry. I told my son I was going to tell it. I had to do it, okay? It's also made up of other groups of the mixtures between Pharisees and Sadducees. It's a little bit of all of it, okay? These were the group of people that were always against Jesus because Jesus went against everything they knew, right? Jesus always put himself equal to or up against Moses. You see this throughout the entire Sermon on the Mount. Right? Jesus would say, "You have heard it said," that was Moses, and then he would turn around and say, "But I tell you." Now that's him putting himself up to Moses, okay? He always put himself up against Moses. Rubbed the religious leaders just completely wrong, and they hated it, okay? These were the ones that were always around trying to trap Jesus into saying something that they could arrest him for, right? We get a good glimpse of this in Luke, who thoroughly investigated this, like I said earlier. He was a doctor. He investigated this, and he wrote a chronological order of the events of Jesus' life. And in Luke chapter 20, he wrote this. Watching for their opportunities, the leaders sent spies pretending to be honest men. That sounds mean. Right? They tried to get Jesus to say something they could report to the Roman governor so that they could arrest him. Right? Teacher, they said, we know you speak and teach what is right and are not influenced by what others think. You teach the way of God truthfully. Now tell us, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? He saw through their trickery and said, show me a Roman coin. Now, as far as I can tell, this is the only place in all the New Testament and all the Gospels where Jesus actually asked for money. Show me a Roman coin. He didn't ask to keep it, he just showed me, right? Show me a Roman coin. Whose picture and title are stamped on it? Caesar's, they replied. Well then, he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. So they failed to trap him by what he said in front of the people. Instead, they were amazed by his answer, and they became silent. That was Jesus. He was good at it. He saw through their trickery and their shenanigans. I like that word, shenanigans. So, who do the proud represent? If we looked at the proud, the religious leaders of the time, who would they represent? These could represent those who walked away from faith because they couldn't reconcile real life with the things that the Bible teaches. Some people have a hard time reconciling things that happen in life, the things that the Bible teaches. Why do good things or bad things happen to good people? Right? They have a hard time, so they walk away from their faith. Maybe this could represent those who have heard about the church, who have heard that we have heard about use the church for their own personal gain. We hear about stories in the news all the time, people that are pastors and stuff, and they steal all the money from the churches, right? For their own personal gain. That's what the religious leaders were doing. They were trying to trap Jesus for their own personal gain. Because he was going up against them, right? Personally, I think this represents a group of people that we know as the atheists. Nowadays, the atheists simply try to go out there and they try to prove that Jesus isn't who Jesus is. They try to defunk the Bible. They are always going against us because they believe we, as Christians, as believers, are the problem with society. Okay? So that's who the proud represent. The last group of the people in the community of Jesus is the crowds. Everywhere Jesus went were crowds. Everywhere. They followed him everywhere he went. Right? In Luke, he wrote this. He goes, when they came down from the mountain, the disciples stood with Jesus on a large level area, surrounded by his followers and the crowds. There were people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from as far north at the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. They came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those troubled by evil spirits were healed. Everyone tried to touch him because healing power went out from him. And he healed everyone. Even when Jesus tried to get away to mourn the death of his cousin John the Baptist, when he found out that John the Baptist they say he got on a boat, he was going across. And when he stepped off the boat on the other side of the lake, Matthew writes, Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat. He was trying to get away just to be alone, to think about what happened to his cousin John. And he had compassion on them, and he healed their sin. So even when Jesus wanted to be alone, the crowds followed him. One of the big points that the crowds served in the community of Jesus was the Pharisees were scared to arrest Jesus because of the crowds. Because in Matthew, after Jesus told the parable of the evil farmer, we get just one sample of this, a glimpse of it. He says, when the leading priests and Pharisees heard the parable, they realized he was telling a story against them. They were the wicked farmers, and they wanted to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowds, who considered Jesus to be a prophet. And the last reason why they followed Jesus was because he did the miraculous. Right? And John, who lost more friends and lost more people that he cared about when he wrote this, he goes, after this, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. A huge crowd kept following him wherever he went because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. So who do the crowds represent? Who are the crowds? The crowds are those that follow Jesus but never really give Jesus everything. They never go all in. They are there, but they are not part of that community. There are those that are looking, but they aren't really sure that it's true. And maybe, just maybe, the crowds are those at the end of Jesus' life that were asking for Barabbas. They're just following the crowd, like the New England Patriot fans, just following the bandwagon. Just kidding. If you're a New England Patriot, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you guys. I really don't follow football. Okay? So there you have it. That's what makes up the community of Jesus. The few, the proud, and the crowds. I made it rhyme so you can remember it. Okay? The few, the proud, the crowds. But what does Jesus say about community? So let's take a look at that. Okay? We're about to look at a very well-known conversation between Jesus and the community group, the few. Okay? When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "Who do they say the Son of Man is?" Well, they replied, "Some say that John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets." Then he asked, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. And I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I shall build my church. And the power of hell will not conquer it, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you forbid on earth will be forbid in heaven. Whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven." That was written in the book of Matthew. What is awesome about this passage is what I believe Jesus actually meant when he said, "Upon this rock I shall build my church." Okay? But first I have to give you a little bit of history so that I can explain why we have what we have. Okay? Have any of you ever heard of a man by the name of William Tinsdale? I have. I've studied him. He's an amazing guy. Okay. William was part of the Protestant Reformation. Oh, so long ago. Okay. What William was known for was he was one of the first people to take the actual Greek manuscripts that they had, and translate them word for word into English. Okay. Because of this, and the Bibles that were printed, William was ultimately hung, and after he was hung, he was then burned at the stake for heresy. Okay? Now, why would I break off and tell you all that? It's because of what he translated here, not what we read when we read the word church, that I want to talk about. Okay? The word we read in the Bible, church, comes from an old German word that can be translated to house of God. Okay? That's a building. Right? I promise you, that's not what Jesus was talking about. The word that he actually used here was a Greek word that was pronounced ekklesia. It's not going to be up there. I don't even know if I got it spelled right. Ekklesia. Okay? If you were to look this word up, the Strong Concordance, this word would translate into assembly, gathering, or congregation. So let's look at it again. Jesus said, upon this rock, upon this declaration, upon the fact that I am the Messiah, upon the fact that I am the Son of God, I shall build my gathering. I shall build my congregation. I shall build my assembly. Jesus always intended it to be a group, a community of people, one anothering one another, helping, praying, teaching, and using all those amazing gifts we get from the Holy Spirit to one another, one another. Upon this rock I shall build my ecclesia, my church, my gathering, my people. So where are you? Where are you today in the community of Jesus? Are you part of the few? Are you in the all-in crowd? I don't care what it costs me. I don't care what I have to give up. It's all yours. Are you here to check a box, hoping that something is said that might convince you that it's all real? And if you're here and you're part of that third group, I just want to tell you welcome. I am so glad you're here this morning, and we love you. So as I'm bringing this to a close, I can bring the worship team to come up here. My question to end this is, what do you need to get into the community of the few? Maybe today, to get into that community, is giving your life to Jesus. Actually giving your life to Jesus. Saying, I want to follow you. I want to be a disciple of Jesus. Maybe it's joining a group. Dave told us all of them. There's a bunch of them to choose from. And I'm sure, I promise you, the leaders would love to have you there. I know I would love to. Monday nights. Or maybe it's as simply as serving in some sort of way within this body at this church. If you don't know how you can do that, great news. Today is step 3 of the Next Steps program, where we teach you how to empower you, how we empower you to serve this body, this community, this ecclesia. So what is your next steps? Let's pray.